Your math curriculum is likely divided into units of study, which can shift and vary. For example, you could be in a measurement unit or a geometry unit, but some aspects of the math curriculum are really meant to be developed over the long haul and need to be part of a program that gets daily attention. So aspects like counting and part-whole relations and fluency are really developed best through short, meaningful experiences that are frequent, and that's the distributed practice idea. In the previous lesson, we talked about how number talks could be used to help develop part-whole relations. And also today we're going to talk a little bit about an extension from that, which is reinforcement tasks. Initially, all children will need some reinforcement for new ideas, and eventually you'll end up with some differentiation where clearly some students would benefit by reinforcement even when others are ready to do something a little different. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at reinforcement tasks for decomposing number. As we do that, we remind ourselves that the standard indicates that children in kindergarten should be decomposing numbers less than or equal to 10. 10 is a good target number, and children in kindergarten are expected to work with all the partner numbers for 10. Typically, this starts with very low numbers early in the year, and you really want to make sure that they understand them well. The goal isn't to get through all the numbers through 10. The goal is for the children to understand the numbers really well. And we're going to talk in a minute about what that entails and involves. So it's possible, even while children have worked with 10, that their work with, say, 8 or 9 is not as solid by the end of the year. On the other hand, you might have another group of students who made it to 10 and know all of them really solid. They definitely need to be able to think about how to partition quantities into groups, at least 2 groups, and some of your more advanced students may master that and move into all kinds of different combinations they can think of to partition it into 3 addends perhaps. Also, they're going to begin to record their decompositions as part of this standard. So we'll take a look at some ways in which reinforcement activities can be utilized for this goal. First of all, we have to think about what it means to understand a number well. It clearly means so much more than knowing that the numeral 4 goes with the word 4, although those are required. It requires so much more than being able to identify a set that has 4 items in it out of a group of sets. It means so much more than being able to count out a set of 4. So those are early things that you work on. That's the counting, the cardinality, the number word, and the written numeral work, which we talked about in the Part A module. And all of those things are very important. But now this standard helps us understand that to really understand numbers requires so much more than that. We need to be able to know what is 1 more, what is 1 less, what it's greater than, what it's less than, and what all of its partner numbers are. How can it be decomposed? So 5 is no longer the numeral 5, or being able to recognize a set of 5, or being able to count out a set of 5, or being able to write the word 5. It's also knowing that 5 is 1 and 4, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 3 and 2, 5 and 0, 0 and 5. All of those, and understanding that 5 is positioned in the number system as 1 more than 4 and 1 less than 6. All of those are really important aspects of understanding 5-ness. And kindergarten children can also get to the point where they see that 2 5s make a 10, and a lot of their work with, say, 10 frames, for example, or math racks can reinforce that kind of concept. So when a number or quantity, a target quantity, in this case I'm talking about a total that we're going to end up partitioning, and when that's still fairly new, students are going to need to have not just some number talks, but also some extension opportunities, some reinforcement activities that solidify their understanding of that quantity and get everybody really engaged and involved with acting it out for themselves. Later, when the idea is not so new, that can be merged into occasional practice. But the kids who are going to need some extra timing shouldn't be held to the time scale as everybody else. So with differentiation, they're going to need continued reinforcement with this target concept if you deem that necessary. So when can reinforcement tasks fit into the daily schedule? Well, sometimes they can be integrated into number talks. Some of the ideas are very short, and so after a number talks typically last 5 to 10 minutes. So if you have just a 5-minute one and you've got time, you can do a quick reinforcement activity right at the end of a number talk. It can be a station. If your classroom is set up with RTI rotations, it can be one of the stations. And that also works really well if you are doing a differentiation approach, because if you know that students really still need to work with a particular number, then you can assign them to that station, but perhaps other children get a different station that they're assigned to as part of their rotation. It can become part of a math center if you have a certain time of the day where they're exploring math centers, or perhaps you have so many days a week that they are at literacy centers, and then other days a week they switch and they're in a math center. It can be homework, although I would only ever assign a reinforcement task as homework if I felt that the nature of the task itself was extremely familiar to the student, so that it was really just reinforcement, but they weren't having to try to figure out what to do. It can be a finish early option, and in fact I love finish early options that get students still thinking about math. The one problem with that approach is that the children who need the most reinforcement often are not the people who finish early, so those students will need a different outlet for where that reinforcement comes. And it can also be a lesson warm-up. So if you had a number talk in the morning about something, then later when you get to the lesson, you might have them do a quick warm-up related to that same idea and revisit it then. As I said before, do keep a lookout for the students who need longer periods of time to spend with thinking about a number and how a number can be partitioned. The standard requires children to find ways to record their decompositions. So we're going to look at a couple of different possible approaches to that. Here we have a chart where the students have used dots for recording the quantities, and then after that, then thought about how it could be stated as an expression, beginning with teacher modeling, and eventually some of the students wanted to take control over how to record it as an expression. So that's an example. Also, in the teaching resources, I have number bond recording sheets, and this one is a generic one that can be used with a variety of activities where they can keep track of the combinations that they found. Now, obviously, you wouldn't give this recording sheet to a group of students unless they'd already seen number bonds modeled regularly, had collaboratively participated in creating them, and had real meaning for this graphic, understanding which, regardless of orientation, understanding where would you put a part, where would you put the total, etc. Recognizing that the total is the one that has the two boxes leading into it, for example. As you work with a number and as children have some experience with it, you can also set up anchor charts for the whole class based on the work that they have already done. So I'm not recommending that you do this where it's teacher generated, but where you have the students contribute. So you can begin by actually, for example, thinking of what are all the different ways that we could represent 4. And there's not a domino image here, but somebody could actually suggest a domino image as well. So we have all these different ways that people think of to indicate 4. Then after that, they can work on some kind of a task similar to the ones that we'll be talking about soon. Let's say they did a domino hunt and they were to find all the dominoes where the two different parts, two different halves of the domino added up to 4 dots or 4 pips. And then they recorded those on a sheet similar to the one I just showed you. They could come back as a group and we could then generate the bottom part of this chart. And then perhaps we could organize it, and the dot activity there shows 4 green dots and 0 pink dots. And it's organized in such a way that some students may notice a pattern that could be then discussed. Another thing that could actually be discussed by the whole class is their awareness that 3 plus 1 is 4, and so is 1 plus 3. So they might get into the commutative a little bit. So I encourage you, after the students have done explorations, to have some number anchor charts like this around the room as well for the target numbers that your class is working on. So let's take a look at some of these reinforcement tasks that can be done fairly quickly. Some of them can use that number bond recording sheet or some other recording sheet that you design. In this one, the children get strips of cardstock that have dots on them, and there's varying numbers of dots. Some have 1, some have 2, 3, 4, so on. And the children are tasked with putting the cards together to create the target number and finding out how many different ways they can do that. So in the image you see here, the target number is 4, and this child has 4, just 4, so 4 and no extra ones, 3 and 1, 2 and 2, or 2 plus 1 plus 1. So those are a variety of combinations that this one came up with. In this activity, and I like to do a variety of different activities so that students see that quantity in a number of different ways and contexts, and they keep coming back at it, but not in a way that's rote or repetitive in that respect. Varied practice is much more powerful. So in this one, it's one that I actually designed called Sheep in Defense, and you choose a target number of sheep that are assigned to the child, and the sheep are essentially just counters. But they can put their sheep in a row, and then that's their field. And they have a pencil, and they work in partners and trade off. And the partner who's got the pencil in their hand will say, I have the target number of sheep. I have 6 sheep. And then they put the pencil down, and they say, there are 4 sheep in my field. How many are in your field? So the fence partitions the quantity so that each child has like a field. Another person says, I have 2 sheep in my field. And then they record the combination that they found. Hide and peek. I've seen this in a couple of different resources, and essentially you make a snap cube tower of the target number, and then the person hides one behind their back and splits it, and then shows the other person what's in one hand, and the person has to guess what's in the other. This is actually really challenging for kindergarten children, but it can still be a very useful task, even for kids who struggle, because unless we make a big deal about them being wrong, to them it's just a guess, and they're, wow, that's cool, I was really lucky if they get it right. I mean, it doesn't necessarily dawn on students who struggle that maybe they should be able to calculate it and that it's wrong if they don't. So as long as we're willing to allow them to have that fun with it, afterwards, after the person has guessed, then they bring both parts out and they figure out the number bond that created that target number. However, in the meantime, it's a really good formative assessment for you as well, because you can see who is actually understanding and who isn't. If a child has a really solid sense of that quantity, then they should be able to guess if the quantity is 5, for example, and a person pulls out 3. A person who has a really solid understanding of 5 should know that 2 must be behind the back. So it's a good formative assessment task because the kids who struggle just guess, but they're quite happy to play the game. And the kids who have the really solid part-whole understanding, you begin to see that in their responses and in their explanation of how they knew. If it's appropriate for the group of students, they can not only model it as a number bond, but perhaps also an equation. Although hide and peek would technically be a subtraction equation, it's okay at this point if they write that as an addition equation. So even though it might be 5 minus 3 with 2 behind your back, we would still allow them to say 2 plus 3 is 5. This is a very similar game to hide and peek, but it's counters in a cup, and so you get a target number of counters, and they can place the numeral in front of them to remind themselves how many counters they have, and then while one person is hiding their eyes, the other person hides some of the counters and leaves the others revealed, and by looking at it you have to guess how many are under the cup. And again, the children can write the combination, and the teacher can either model the equation, or if you feel the students are ready to try that, they can do so. Partitioning dot arrays. I have a set of worksheets for partitioning dot arrays of 6, 7, 8, and 9 in the teaching resources that I developed for this lesson. And here the children just circle or partition off through kind of circling a group so that they've separated the quantity into 2 parts, and then they record their findings about that decomposition in the number bond, and those then can be shared with the whole class, and they can try to find patterns in the number bonds. Now, these are a few ideas. In fact, this lesson was mainly just a few ideas to get you started. You may actually find that certain things you're already doing in the class are also really helpful for part-whole relations. And I think this will be a really interesting class for people to share in the discussion board about the kinds of things they're already doing, and then hopefully some of these ideas may be ones you would like to try and adopt as well. If you feel like you and your class would really benefit by a lot of ideas beyond what I've mentioned here, these are some of my favorite resources